Why are you right? Yes, you, conservative person. Can you answer that question? I think it's so important that I wrote a book about it. How to be right. The art of being persuasively correct. Because if you can't be persuasive about why you are right, then we, the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, are lost. So here's the simple answer to why you are right. It is a more practical, generous, and compassionate way to live. Let me explain. There have been a bunch of academic studies on how those on the left and right approach problems. They pretty much all come to the same conclusion. The right tends to be risk-averse, more concerned about external threats, like tyranny and terror. Conservatives, get this, tend to be conservative. They are less likely to play with fire in just about every sense, financially, artistically, sexually. They are cautious about changing traditions, sometimes to a fault, which is why they cling to that crazy constitution they like so much and to their guns and their religion. We conservatives also focus on what we can fix and accept what we cannot, which is one of the many reasons we're not obsessed over global warming. With radical Islam, we know what the threat is, and that it's a lot worse than a few missing polar bears. I know that makes me sound mean. Sorry, polar bears. Liberals, the research tells us, are generally more outgoing, more likely to try new stuff. They're open to new ideas, though not school choice or flat taxes or a market-based healthcare reform, and are less likely to feel threatened by unfamiliar things. This is why, in general, they seem to have more fun. They're more likely to try drugs, for example, which is fine as long as they don't end up throwing up in my toaster. In short, liberals are pretty liberal. They feel free to take risks that the risk-averse usually end up paying for over and over, which explains the necessity for conservatism. We are the cleanup crew. Liberals may seem to have more fun, and many do, but according to polls, they aren't as happy as conservatives. And with all the fun they're having, I've never quite figured out why the angriest people I've encountered in my life have been liberals. Maybe it's because short-term fun doesn't translate into long-term happiness. Marriage, families, and religion do that, and those are the things conservatives most value. Liberals tend to live for now, conservatives for later. A risk-averse conservative is more likely to save money. He is more likely to protect his investments. He is more likely to protect property and advocate for rule of law and preservation of individual protections. And he offers no excuses for looting. Instead, he empathizes with the Asian, Arab, and Black small businessman whose convenience store, laundry, or restaurant goes up in flames during the riot that liberals reflexively endorse as an understandable response to injustice. Of course, conservatives aren't risk-averse in everything, but they take risks with their own lives, not with the society. Conservatives risk all to build businesses. That risk, however, is rooted in a fact-based belief, not faith, in the free market. If people want the product or service you're supplying at the price you're asking, you will succeed and the risk will pay off. Over time, it's conservative risk-taking that creates a civilization by building families, businesses, and nations, all of which creates more wealth that can then be used to help those in need. You need money to make money, but you also need money to give money. Conservatism makes what liberalism takes. So for example, for liberals to get their minimum wage hike, first we need conservatives to build businesses, to think like businessmen, to sacrifice their own salaries in order to pay others, to sleep on floors, if necessary, in order to break even. Then, when they make a profit and things are going great, when the calm sets in, liberalism can appear and say, "How dare you not pay these people a living wage?" Once the tables are full of diners and bills are being paid, and you're thinking about opening a second joint, liberalism arrives to demand its cut. Think of it as a protection racket, sort of like the Gambino family, but without loyalty, job prospects, and tracksuits. In short, conservatism doesn't compete with liberalism, it sustains it. Without conservatism, there is no liberalism. And so when a liberal asks you, "Why are you a conservative?" simply say, "So that you can be a liberal." I'm Greg Gutfeld.
What's the major difference between liberals and conservatives? For liberals, the answer is easy. Liberals are compassionate and conservatives are mean. I am a liberal, public radio host Garrison Keillor wrote in 2004, and liberalism is the politics of kindness. President Barack Obama agrees. Kindness covers all of my political beliefs, he has said. Earlier in his political career, Senator Obama urged college students to broaden your ambit of concern and empathize with the plight of others. If liberalism is the politics of kindness, it follows that conservatism must be the opposite, heartless. New York Times columnist Paul Krugman contends that conservatives want to limit government spending on social welfare programs because they take positive glee in inflicting further suffering on the already miserable. Is this characterization fair? Is it accurate? Hardly. For one thing, helping others, generosity, requires resources to be generous with. To provide needy people tangible assistance, as opposed to inconsequential gestures, requires wealth. And wealth has to be created before it can be donated. This necessity, however, complicates the politics of kindness. Both economic theory and the historical record of different competing economic systems clearly show that the best way to create wealth is to narrow rather than broaden the ambit of our concern. Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, wrote in 1776, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Our natural desire to care more for our families and friends than for distant strangers is not a moral defect, but an advantage. Free markets and voluntary associations, such as churches and civic groups, make the most of this asset. The welfare state tears it down. There is then a glaring contradiction in the politics of kindness. On the one hand, liberals frequently criticize the selfishness of people preoccupied with building careers, businesses, and investments. On the other, liberals are bursting with ideas for all the humane things government can do by redistributing the wealth created by these so-called selfish people. There's another contradiction. Liberals champion government action as the best vehicle to alleviate suffering. At the same time, they are uninterested in the question of whether these government programs actually do alleviate suffering. To take just one example, the government's own studies have demonstrated that the federal preschool program, Head Start, does not achieve its goals. Children enrolled in it are no better off by the end of the first grade than those children who don't enroll. But this program has lost none of its liberal luster. On the contrary, liberals constantly call for its expansion. Our federal, state, and local governments spend more than $3.2 trillion per year on programs designed to prevent or relieve poverty. That's more than $10,000 per American. Yet the official poverty rate has fluctuated in the same narrow range, from 11 to 15% of the population for the past 40 years. How can the politics of kindness be so cavalier about whether government efforts to alleviate suffering succeed? The problem is not a deficiency of compassion, but the defective moral logic of compassion itself. The word compassion means, literally, suffering together with another. And there's the problem. The whole point of compassion is for empathizers to feel better when the awareness of another's suffering distresses the observer. But this ultimate purpose does not guarantee that those who are the object of empathy will fare better. So, on top of all of its other problems, our $3 trillion welfare state doesn't work because its liberal architects and defenders don't really care whether it works. The liberal asks, does it feel good? The conservative asks, does it do good? If you really want to help people, it should be pretty obvious which is the more important question. I'm Bill Vogley of the Claremont Institute for Prager University.
There are crazy positions on the far left and crazy positions on the far right. On the left, there are people who believe a man can get pregnant. that the world is going to end in a decade if we don't cap carbon emissions, that the real purpose of the American Revolution was to preserve slavery. On the right, there are people who deny the Holocaust happened, who believe that whites are inherently superior to other races, that no one should pay taxes. But there's an important difference between these two extremes. The crazies on the right have no voice. They are shunned. They live mostly on the far fringes of the internet. The crazies on the left have a loud voice. They are celebrated. They live in the halls of Congress, in state legislatures, and in governors' mansions. In light of this distinction, it might be interesting to ask ourselves this question: which group, the left or the right, is more radical? We can arrive at a common sense answer by posing this thought experiment. What would America look like if the left got everything it wanted, and what would America look like if the right got everything it wanted? Let's start with the left. Taxes would go up on individuals and corporations to pay for more social programs. Everything from universal childcare to free college tuition. Many on the left call for income taxes as high as 70%. Private health insurance would be abolished. The government would provide all healthcare services. Everyone in the medical field, from doctors, nurses, and administrators, would be government employees. Americans would pay for this government healthcare through much higher taxes. Illegal immigration would be decriminalized. It would still be illegal to enter the country without proper documentation, but no one who made it into the U.S. would be prosecuted for doing so. Illegal immigrants would also receive free healthcare, free education, and free housing. The Green New Deal would be adopted. Hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for wind and solar power would be added to the federal budget. Drilling for fossil fuels, the current source of 80% of our energy, would be sharply curtailed or eliminated altogether. So would nuclear power. As a result, consumers' electric bills would be much higher. Reparations would be paid for the past injustice of slavery. How it would be paid and exactly to whom is not clear. Legally acquiring a gun would become much more difficult. College debt would be canceled. Those who had already paid for college would get nothing. Transgender women, biological men who identify as women, would be allowed to compete against women in sports. America's military budget would be slashed by 25 to 50%. Speech codes would be enforced throughout American life. And that's just a partial list. Now let's ask what would happen if the right got what it wanted. Income taxes would be cut. Capital gains taxes would be cut. Corporate taxes would be cut. And those cuts would be made permanent. All regulations that make doing business unnecessarily difficult and don't protect public health would be repealed. The issue of abortion would be sent back to the states for each state to decide its own abortion rules for itself. Many more charter schools would be opened, and it would become much easier to fire bad teachers. In order to vote, citizens would need to present a valid ID. The border with Mexico would be secured. The only way to enter the United States would be through designated border crossings. In order to qualify for welfare assistance, you would have to prove you could not work. The healthcare system would be open to free market reforms. For example, insurance companies could sell policies across state lines. Students in elementary school would recite the Pledge of Allegiance at the start of each school day. So what can we conclude from our experiment? It's not hard to figure out. If the right got everything it wanted, the government would get much smaller. The citizen would have more freedom. If the left got everything it wanted, the government would get much bigger. The citizen would have less freedom. You're not radical if you want America to be what it's always been, committed to individual liberty. You're only radical if you want to fundamentally transform America into something it's never been. Which country do you want to live in? I'm Will Witt for Prager University.
We're supposed to be the United States of America, but in many ways, we're now divided into two very different nations. There is Red State America and there's Blue State America. The red states favor conservative, small government, free market policies, low taxes, light regulation, tough on crime policing, and worker freedom. Think Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Arizona, and Utah. The blue states favor a liberal left, big government approach, high taxes, heavy regulations, high minimum wages, and mandatory union membership. Think New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Illinois, Oregon, and of course, California. Progressives like to argue that their big government, high tax policies are economically superior and thus better for the poor, minorities, and working class Americans than those of red states. Conservative policies, progressives contend, are culturally backward and tilted to benefit the rich. Let's test this thesis by comparing three of the largest red states, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, with three of the largest blue states, California, New York, and Illinois. If progressive policies really work, then Americans should be rushing to get into the blue states. But just the opposite is happening. Americans are packing up their U-Hauls and heading to the red states. According to the New York Times in August 2020, so many people wanted to leave New York City that moving companies were turning away business. They just couldn't handle the demand. This exodus may be accelerating, but it's not new. Over the last decade, the three big blue states each lost an average of 1 million people to other states, while the three big red states gained almost 1 million from other states. Makes perfect sense. Americans like freedom. Small government means more freedom, and freedom means opportunity. Let's say you're looking for a job. Over the last decade, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee have gained twice as many jobs as the progressive states. Not only that, but your money goes further in red states. According to a 2019 Tax Foundation study, your $100 stretches to $111 in purchasing power in Tennessee, while in New Jersey it shrinks to $89. If you're a big corporation or a small company looking for a business-friendly environment, affordable housing, or maybe just a better quality of life, where are you going to go? The tough decision is not choosing a red state or a blue state. The tough decision is which red state to move to. Progressives like to say that this isn't about economics, it's about weather. The red states tend to be in the south and southwest where the weather is warmer. But that doesn't explain why so many people are leaving California, which has the best weather in the country. So what does explain the migration from blue states? Start with taxes. The two most populous blue states, California and New York, have the highest tax rates in America, while the two most populous red states, Texas and Florida, have no income tax at all. When taxes get too high, people move to where taxes are lower. The problem for the high tax states is that these people take their money, their ambition, and their employees with them. Then there is crime. Do blue cities do better than red cities? The answer, of course, is no. Of the 20 cities with the highest murder rates, 18 are run by left-leaning Democrats, and for the most part have been for decades. And these cities aren't getting safer, they're getting more dangerous. A good chunk of Minneapolis was burned to the ground as a result of riots following the death of George Floyd. Portland had over 90 consecutive nights of rioting, not peaceful protests, rioting. Seattle allowed an entire section of the city to declare itself an autonomous zone, a first in American history. Progressive governors, progressive mayors, progressive police chiefs run all of these cities and states. Ask any resident of Los Angeles or San Francisco about the rise in homelessness, and you'll get a litany of horror stories. Both cities, of course, have a long history of progressive mayors. How about keeping us healthy and safe? Surely the progressive states with their strict lockdowns did a better job saving lives from the coronavirus. Nope. Adjusted for population, as a resident of New York, New Jersey, or Illinois, you are 3, 4, or even 5 times more likely to die of the virus than if you lived in a red state like Florida, Texas, Georgia, Utah, or Arizona. Progressives and liberal Democrats may mean well. They certainly talk a lot about how much they care about the poor, minorities, and the working class. Yet somehow it's always the poor, minorities, and the working class who pay the price for their bad policies. That's why those who can move do move. Those who can't get stuck with the short end of the stick. Red state America is prospering. Blue state America is in meltdown. So where do you want to live? I'm Stephen Moore, economist at Freedom Works for Prager University.